special meetup we have in conjunction with Flutter Day. Today we have Jose Alba, actually from Google on the Flutter team. And he's going to give us a great talk about widgets and about how to create them and everything you wanted to know actually about widgets, which is great. I am Bert Beckman. I'm a Flutter developer and independent consultant. Also co-chairing this is Michael Jordan. He's also a Flutter developer and has a small Flutter development company. Then we also have sorry, it's the first time I've done this in a while, and I am dropping out on Rona. Yeah, sorry, Rona. I talk to you all the time, and it's just this presenting thing just, caught me by surprise a little bit. Anyways, Rona is has also a small, actually a small Flutter application that's out there. That she has a small company that was early on board with Flutter, and she is out in the marketplace. And Rona, it's related to, is it related to running or is it related to bicycling?
Right now it's related to cycling. So we build custom endurance training plans, started with cycling, eventually we'll get to running, but yeah, and it's all built in Flutter.
Okay, so this is Rona Kilmer, and actually what's the name of your company?
Redio.
Redio, okay. Okay, and also we have in the past been sponsored by Code Talent. They are a placement group in downtown Denver. They usually provide us with meeting space, and we're very appreciative to them. So anyways, yesterday was Flutter Day, pretty amazing day. I was able to catch just a little bit of it, but everything was recorded. So I've been going through when I have time and watching the recordings. And I'm just amazed at the quality of the people involved in Flutter. The presenters, the developers, the momentum that's behind it, the toolkits that are out there. It's truly, truly amazing to me how much progress has been made so quickly. And I think it's just going to keep continuing. And I think that I feel personally I picked the right technology to really get deeply into, because it just feels like it's really, really going someplace. I originally was in React Native and made the switch over, and very, very, very happy about it. So anyways, I think we're all excited about Flutter, and we are excited right now to talk directly to someone from Flutter about widgets and about the inside picture of what's happening with Flutter. So with that, Jose, greetings, and it's all yours.
Thanks, Bert. So my name's Jose Nicolas Alba. I have worked in Material for the last year, practically. Before working full-time in Material, I interned at Google. I also worked as a Flutter developer. And before even interning, I was also trying to go into Flutter development. I just thought it was hot, and I still do. Today we're going to discuss how Material, so the organization I work under, creates new widgets in Flutter. And basically, if you don't know, Material is one of the packages in among the 12 packages in Flutter that you're able to create beautiful widgets using the Google Material system design. So basically, it's my team's responsibility to make these widgets into Flutter. And today I want to discuss pretty advanced topics of I'm going to start off how we do it as from the design standpoint. The beef of the conversation is going to be actually implementing the widget, and then the last bit is some of the complications that we that goes into making like after the widget's been made. There's complications afterwards, and that when that part comes, I'll talk about like GitHub issues and whatnot. So like I mentioned, the agenda is like designing the material widget. Then the second part is going to be implementing the widget in Flutter, and the last part is any complications. The main beef of the conversation is going to be the middle section. That's where we're going to go more in depth, and I'm just going to note that some of these topics that I want to go into might be some advanced topics, but like the idea is just to know it, and hopefully I'm able to explain myself pretty thoroughly in that sense, and I make it simple to understand. So I'll try my absolute best. What is Google Material? Material design is inspired by physical world and its textures. Basically, like if you have a button, it's gonna have a shadow because it gives you that implementation that that you can touch it, right? Like we want the material to be like how you feel it, pretty much. So that's what Google Material does. Like you'll see Google Material in iOS, web, Flutter, and whatnot. So you'll see Google Material throughout these different tools, I guess. Today, we're gonna talk about the material slider. The slider widget is basically a widget that you can just move from left to right. It has a set of precise measurements, and anytime you click it, it should give you like an immediate response. So it's going to be a stateful widget. And I'll talk about stateful and stateless widgets later throughout the presentation. Designing the material widget is one of the three conversations. The slider allows you to make selections from a range of values. The slider reflects a range of values along a bar from which users may select a single value. It's ideal for like choosing system volume, brightness, or applying image filters. There shouldn't be any delay when, like, the moment you move the value indicator, it should immediately give you the new state. So that's what the slider is. Here's some, like, when you think of the slider widget, like, you might think it might be simple, but there's a lot of things that the material organization has to consider, like the different types of sliders. So for example, in this case, the slider you see right now just has one value indicator. And in case you don't know what I mean by value indicator, I mean, like, you see the thumb right here. This is the thumb. And the moment you click the thumb, a value indicator pops up, which just tells you the value that the slider is currently in. It's not necessary, but you can have that. Among the sliders, there's also a range slider, which gives you like two options, two thumbs. And I believe that's in the next slide. You can also have discrete sliders, which mean like you're only allowed choosing specific points in the slide. You're allowed continuous sliders, which is like a range of values between like your min and max value. And you also got to think into like what happens if you hover into the slider. What are some like predicaments? And yeah. So it's our responsibility to implement whatever the designers. Google Material has a lot of there's a lot of work that goes into this. Like, it's not just the designer's input. We do research on this, like where we see like how optimal like the slider can be moved. Like, it's just a bunch of research goes into this to like try to create the best, not only engineering perspective but designer perspective too. So like the material organization, just to like implement the slider widget, we had to like talk with designers, we had to talk with program managers, project managers, research, and other engineers, just like across different teams. And like again, like with Flutter, basically when I want to make the slider is painted on a canvas, but in the sense like of web, there's gonna be some like, since web has been around for so long, like the HTML elements might lead to problems. So it might be a bit more complicated, and we gotta worry about how it's gonna be introduced into like web or Android, iOS, Flutter. So here's like some of the states that the slider can have. There's enabled, disabled, hover, focus, and press. Hover and focus state is like kind of something newer that we have to worry about now with Flutter Web. Flutter Web is still in beta, but with Flutter Web, that comes like you start having to like analyze what happens if the mouse is hovering over the widget, and what happens if the mouse is like what happens if that widget's focus. How are you going to control it? So these are things we have to worry about. We're gonna be thinking a lot about accessibility. So in case you have like your eyes can't see or you can't even see, you should still be able to use our widgets without a problem, and it feels comfortable. There should be no problem. And we have an accessibility lead too for this. So yeah. This is just an image showing you like some of the information that goes into it. This design spec is outdated, but it's still like it's very precise if you think about it. Like for example, maybe the thumb has to be exactly 12 pixels, and if it's 13 pixels, it's going to be 2 pixel long. And then like it's just the design that goes into it is a lot more than most people think about it. Again, we had to iterate through this multiple times after designing and research and implementing it. It's not just like a one-time thing. It's a long thing. So like now we're gonna go into like the beef of this presentation. How to design the slider widget in Flutter. So we're gonna start out at like high-level information, and basically the Flutter can be split into 3 main topics. There's a Flutter framework, which is gonna handle like it's just gonna be the code you use in Dart. The Flutter engine is how, like for example, Skia will paint it into like our canvas or whatnot, and like the embedders. There's just more advanced topics, but basically the main topics we're gonna discuss about is the Flutter framework, and you'll see that there's material, Cupertino, widgets, rendering, animation, painting, gestures, foundation. We're going to discuss all these. The material, so the Flutter framework can be split into 12 different libraries. Throughout the presentation, I'm going to discuss how the slider widget implements all these different libraries or packages. I might make them interchangeable. So when I say libraries, I also mean packages, just in case. Yeah. So among the 12 packages, 3 of them are pretty high level. There's going to be Material, Cupertino, and the Widgets library. The Widgets library is going to be a bunch, I think it's close to 200 widgets, which are unbiased and they do specific things. So for example, there's a center widget, which its responsibility just to center a widget into the middle of the screen. There's going to be a scaffold widget, which is going to like scaffold how the application looks throughout whatnot. And these are specific widgets that are unopinionated, and you'll see them pretty much everywhere. Like you'll see like a center widget can be implemented on a phone, but it can also be implemented on desktop or whatnot. Just simple but like straightforward widgets. The material package is basically it basically implements the material design system. This is the library my team and I work on. We try to give you enough guidance where your app looks beautiful, but not too much where it looks like a Google application. And this is basically the library that you'll notice that whenever you create like your Flutter application, at the very top of your Dart document, at the very top, you're going to see package, like import package material. And this is how you import it. And these are going to contain widgets like the slider, cards, chips, buttons, and things you see around, like in pretty much every framework, I guess. And then with the material package, that's the Google like design system. We also have the Cupertino package, which pretty much represents the Apple design system. iOS and macOS, like there's a lot of muscle memory that goes into it, and it might not feel normal with Android. When you go back on iOS, it's not the same thing as going back on Android. And the reason we created the Cupertino package is just so like so you could create applications that are also target like iOS and Mac OS audience, and you do that using the Cupertino package. But one of the problems, like let's say you want to use the slider widget, like using the Cupertino slider, then what happens if you want to like use the Cupertino slider, but like not for your Android audience, and that's something we also try to take care of for you. Flutter handles cross-platform design. So let's say you use the slider widget, and if you use like the constructor slider.adaptive, it's gonna adapt to whatever operating system you're using. So if you're targeting Mac OS and iOS, and you use the slider adaptive constructor, then if your client is using that platform, then it's gonna give you the slider, like the Cupertino slider. If your clients are using Android, Windows, Linux, or even Fuchsia, then you're gonna get the material slider, and that's how Flutter handles it. So this is the Cupertino slider, and you might recognize it if you have an iPhone. This is how Apple like sliders look like. So if you use the slider.adaptive constructor, then depending on the OS your client's using, it'll give you the proper slider. So now we're going to do a deeper dive into the Flutter framework. I wanted to drink water real quick. So sliders, so like in Flutter, most people are familiar with the concept of stateful widgets and stateless widgets. Stateless widgets are going to be something that's pretty much immutable, like you're not going to be interacting with it, and you're just not going to be interacting with it. Stateful widgets are like, it's going to change the state of your application, and the slider falls in the stateful widget category because you can grab the value indicator and move it, and depending like I mentioned before, once you move the value indicator, it should give you an immediate response towards like changing the volume or whatnot. I'm going to talk about like the 5 different components that make the slider and range slider widget. Number 1 here is this is the value indicator I was talking about. It's just like if you clicked it, then it's going to return you the value the slider is. Oops. Then there's the track. You might not notice it, but the track on the inactive part is going to be 1px smaller than the and then the track on the active part. So this one is going to be smaller than this one. So that's what the track is. The third thing is the thumb. The thumb is what you're going to be holding and interacting with when you're choosing the options that you want with the slider. Fourth is the overlay. The overlay is active when it's like similar to the value indicator. It activates when you click it. So like this one, you could see that this this thumb was activated. Like I was clicking it when taking the screenshot, because you can see that the overlay is there. And then the last thing is the tick. This little tick, you'll see it. This is for like this is to show, like let's say you're using the discrete slider, which forces your user to choose, like in this case it'd be 0, 40, 80, 120, 160, and 200. Then the user can't go in between. That's what the discrete slider is, and we show that using the tick. And I also want to mention before we go forward, because this is going to be mentioned, I want to refer to this overlay right here as the overlay slider. It represents the component overlay slider, and I'm also going to be talking about the overlay, which is not this. The overlay is pretty much a widget in Flutter that lets you float things on top of each other. Imagine it's a stack, of plates, and then you just put the sponge on top. The sponge is on the overlay. In this situation, the value indicator, anytime you call the value indicator is actually rendered on the overlay and not the media core. In Flutter, we make beautiful widgets that developers could use. Your application is a tree of these widgets. And if it's a tree, that means your tree is going to consist of leaf nodes, right? The slider is a leaf node. Well, the slider is not a leaf node. The slider is actually a stateful widget, but the slider is implemented calling a leaf node. So, like when you call this, if you check out the actual class, slider is a stateful widget, but when you're actually going to, like, right below the slider is a leaf node, and that's what's gonna render your information into the canvas. And I'll talk about this canvas I keep talking about later. It's a more advanced topic, but I'll try my best to explain. Like I mentioned before, there's the slider constructor and there's a slider.adaptive. Depending on what your audience wants, you can use the slider.adaptive. This is how we implement it. If you use the slider.adaptive constructor, then we're going to see what platform your user is running. If your user is running on Android, Fuchsia, Linux, or Windows, we're going to return the material slider. And then if your client's running on iOS or macOS, and we return the Cupertino slider. The target platform.android is a property in the foundations library or package. And that's another one off our chart. So that now you see how, like, the slider uses the foundation property. The foundation package basically lets you call, like, low-level information about, like, your user's phone or something. In this case, we're targeting, like, iOS and whatnot. So using that comes from the foundation package. Another important thing to note that a lot of people don't know is, and I think this is really cool, is, like, when you use a material widget, you can pretty much encapsulate it. So, like, it's any of its descendants. If it's encapsulated with a slider theme, then its descendants are gonna have that theme data. So, so this is, I'm gonna try my best to explain this, but if, like, basically when you call the constructor has multiple properties, and if you call the active color constructor, then the active track color is going to be that color. But if you don't put that property in, that property is just going to be null. And basically what the question mark lets you do is, if this first property is null, then use the next property. So now we're checking if the slider theme, like, was called in the material app or at any point in its hierarchy. If the slider theme data is still null, then there's, like, the basis of the slider, and basically this base comes from, like, the theme information. This is going to be a harder topic to explain, but hopefully you understood that. The next few slides will explain it more thoroughly. It is common for material widgets to be themable. Typically, this is done automatically in the theming constructor when you wrap your entire application with the widget material app. If you created a Flutter application, you would have, like, the very root of your application, like, after you run the run app, it's called the material app, and the material app is going to give you, like, a lot of information, a lot of important information. So pretty much everyone that makes it Flutter application either uses the widgets app, material app, or Cupertino app. And within that widget, within that class, you could set up lots of parameters, and this is going to affect your entire application. There's going to be two main parameters we're going to be talking about: theme, and theme lets you customize the entire application's theme. And then there's also dark theme. So if, like, let's say you, like, for example, my phone is set to dark theme, and if I create a Flutter application, I want to make sure I create a dark theme for users that activate dark theme. It's a really cool feature. So within those two parameters, you can set the theme data, and then if you set the slider theme data within those two parameters, then your entire application is going to have the slider theme. Or it doesn't have to necessarily be the slider theme. It could be widget theme. Like, so if you want to change the button themes for your entire application, you do button theme or slider theme. It's a very useful thing to learn. So here's like an example of how to use the slider theme. You just basically encapsulate at any point. In this case, it's just one hierarchy up. But at any point, it could be like 10 descendants above it. I mean, ascendants above it. The slider theme context is going to pass through the entire widget tree. And you just set the slider theme data. In this case, I'm setting the slider theme data to have a paddle value indicator, which is going to change the shape of our slider value indicator. And like I mentioned, for the material app, if you want to theme the slider, then you would just go to material app, and then you go to theme or dark theme, or both. Like if you want like two different sliders, then you call the theme data constructor, which is the property which is the information that property is going to take, and then you just put in the slider theme data for both dark theme and theme. And so next time, if your user is running dark theme on their phone, then they'll receive the dark theme data. This is the reason you're able to put the slider theme in any point is because it's an inherited theme. That means at any point, if any of your descendants call the slider theme, then its context is going to be passed to, and the slider theme data is set there. This is a common pattern you'll see throughout all material widgets, and it's a pretty important one, in my opinion, to know. It saves you a lot of time too if you understand this concept. So now the slider has a lot of properties. There's track height, and there's all these properties that you see. As I mentioned, it first goes, for a lot of these cases, it first goes to like the widget constructor parameters. If that's null, then it goes to the slider theme parameter. If that's null, then it uses the default. And these are always going to be something. And a lot of the cases, I set the default track height above it. It's going to be something similar to this. It must have just been a bit more complex. And I can later, if you have any questions, I can later go through the slider class and just navigate you through the entire class. So Flutter Web is another. So like Flutter originally ran on Android and iOS, but now Flutter Web is in beta, and we also got to take care of our user constraints for web. Like I mentioned, hover and focus support. There's also keyboard support, so you can use your keyboard to like move the slider indicator. So this is something I'm about to talk about. It's going to be short. If you want to handle keyboard navigation, use the class focusable action detector. And basically, if you use this class, if you can make it so if your user clicks like the H button, then it will do something. Or if your user clicks escape, it will do something. This is a new class specifically for Flutter Web that lets you handle this issue. So here's how it's implemented. So here's the render object I was telling you about that's going to render your information directly to the canvas. But above it, I wrapped it with the focusable action detector. And then there's a bunch of keyboard shortcuts that you can click, mainly the arrow keys on your keyboard. And when you're using, like if you're using the slider and you gain focus of it. So a lot of the time when you're navigating through the website, a lot of people use the tab thing to like focus on whatnot. So let's say you're tabbing through the website and you finally get focus of the slider, then the slider is going to indicate that it's focused by activating the overlay, the slider overlay, and making the shadow a higher elevation. here's how it's implemented. This logical keyboard key comes from one of the packages. I think it's a services package. I don't remember though. And it basically grabs the input from the user, and I want to give it an intent. And the intent is depending on if you're reading, if you're LTR or RTL. So by LTR, I mean like in English, Spanish, French, all these languages are left to right. So when you like writing on a piece of paper, you're gonna be writing left to right. But in other languages like Arabic and Hebrew, you're gonna be doing RTL. So that's something we have to worry about in material and make sure that our slider feels native. So if your system default language is gonna be an RTL language, then when you click right, it should do the opposite of what we're used to. And if you click left, it should do the opposite. So this is how we handle it. So yeah, so the key, like taking the logical keys and like giving them intents, we do that with the services package. That's 5 of the 12 packages now. Then the next concept I want to talk to you about is the value indicator and the overlay. Like I mentioned before, the overlay just allows you to float widgets on top of each other. Like imagine you just had a bunch of dishes and then you just put a sponge on top. The sponge is on the overlay. That's my analogy. And we like basically anytime you click the slider, it should, no matter what, be on top of any other widgets, because the content that you see should be like is activated. And we want, like, if you click the slider, that content should be seen no matter what. That's why it's on the overlay. And this actually led to some problems because you're not allowed rendering. You cannot render like the overlay and the regular media query are different, and you can't use the same render box to render on the overlay and the thing and the other one. So I had to create 2 different render boxes for the value indicator and the rest of the slider, and somehow like talk to each other. And next slide. So this is pretty much the hierarchy of the slider. There's the parent widget, which is anything that calls the slider, and it's gonna like set state with values. Like I mentioned, the slider and the range slider extends the stateful widget. There's slider state, and there's also slider state and range state. But then there's going to be 2 leaf nodes. The 2 leaf nodes are slider render object widget, which is the overlay, thumb, track, and tick marks. And then the other one is the value indicator, because the value indicator has to be rendered on the overlay, which is on a different render box, which is on a different child render. And then those 2 will do the rendering afterwards. So the solution seemed simple. Like after I showed you, it's just, why not just put it into two different things? That solution was a bit more complicated because I didn't want to use 2 different render boxes, so I wanted to figure out if there was a way, and I wasn't able. I wanted to see if it could maybe use it with a custom painter or something. And one of the issues I was running into is like even with the 2 render boxes, the value indicator would be a frame behind the rest of the slider, which was not ideal. So this is how a lot of it's implemented. I created a paint value indicator, which is a callback function, and then in the callback within the slider render, like a lot of calls are being made, and I'm setting the value indicator equal. Like basically, I'm setting my state equal to this right here. So the state paint value indicator is taking this context, and basically I have to bring it back up the tree, and then go back to the value indicator tree, and then the value indicator render boxes actually paints the value indicator. But like this time, the value indicator is on the overlay, and the rest is just on the media query. Yeah. So the way this was done was using the animation package. The animation package provides basic building blocks for implementing animation in Flutter. So like when you build the value indicator, it has like an animation controller that's like coming from the animation package. The value indicator doesn't just pop open. Like it's not just you click it and then immediately it goes. There's an animation that goes through with that. So that's done using a controller. And then the animation package is very dependent on the physics package. So I just put that as an orange. Like it's not directly called with the slider, but you can see how it's related. The value indicator and the overlay, and there was another problem with the value indicator and the overlay. Basically, since they're on two different levels now, one's on the overlay, one's on the regular media query, then there had to be a way for those two to know where each other was. This was done using the composite transform follower, target, and layer link, which acts like the glue. The reason, like, I could have just calculated it and somehow figured out like where the position of the slider is, but that would have just been too complex, and this widget's made to do that. On top of that, it also gives us the freedom if our user wants to like put the slider on a slant, then we don't have to worry about that because these classes are going to take care of that for us. So now we're going to go a deeper dive into the Flutter framework. So this is going to start going to the leaf render child widget, and then at the very bottom it's going to be the render box. Like I mentioned, like a lot of us know what a stateful and stateless widget is. You might also be familiar with proxy widget, which is also part of this like hierarchy. But then the last two widgets are going to be the render object widget. And basically the render object widget is going to give us the capabilities of writing whatever we need into the canvas directly. There are three main types of render object widgets. There's leaf render object widget, which has no children. So when you're creating a like you know when you're using a row or column, the row or column has children because it takes a children property, and this is actually done with the multi-child render object widget. This takes a list of widgets, so children. There's also cases where you only take one child, and for example, in the center widget, it'll only give you a child, and you just put in one widget. And there's also a lot of cases with like buttons and slider where like that's going to be the last call you make, and that's the leaf render object widget. These three different widgets are going to make calls directly to the render box. So the render box, the slider cannot represent anything that is a child, so it is going to be a type of leaf render object widget. Within the leaf render object widget, we will override so there's that class has two main methods: creating the render object, which is similar to like init state for stateful widgets, and then just updating the render object. The render box, I keep referencing the render box after. So like after you make the leaf class, which contains like create the render object and update the render object, the level after that, which is like the lowest level you're going to get into the framework, is going to either be a render object or a render box. The render object is an abstract class that extends abstract node with diagnosable tree mixin and implements hit test target, and it's in the objects objects.dart package. Render box just extends render object and has like specific features that make it a render box. And then there's also a mixin for render box or render object that allow you, like if in the slider case, you're gonna see fonts that change. You can update the font using a mixin called system fonts that change. And basically a lot, like if you don't know what a mixin is, a mixin, like let's say you have a phone, and a lot of the time, like back 5 years ago, if you had like a BlackBerry Pearl, your phone might have had a keyboard, but it wasn't necessarily going to be on every phone. It might have just been a BlackBerry Pearl. So a mixin basically allows you to add a specific feature into your widget, or you don't have to. It allows you to add it. So not all phones are going to have the keyboard like that the user can use. That's why it's called a mixin. And the slider is going to be using the render, is going to be extending the render box, and we're going to be using the mixin the system fonts that change mixin, and this is going to allow us to like repaint the label, because the label, like the text is going to be changing every time you move the value indicator. So that handles the, like we just talked about the render package. The render package hierarchy is used by Flutter Widgets library to implement its layout and painting backend. Yeah, the painting library uses the render objects pretty often. And yeah. So I want to show you this again, because I think the next few slides are going to be very important to understand this. We're going to be talking about just this render box right here. So the render box, so I made a render slider class which extends render box, and here's the constructor for the render slider. It's pretty massive. It's going to be doing a lot of things that you might not think about that the slider would do. So the slider is going to be having a label. The slider thing is going to be passed through. There's the state. The slider has two main types of gestures, the tap and the drag gesture. And so like the main points we're going to talk about the render box are gestures, schedulers, semantics, and paintings. Gestures, schedulers, semantics is going to be useful because it's going to tell you how we do the rest of, like how we use the 12 packages. And then painting is actually painting into the canvas. And then once I get to the painting section, I'll talk about the canvas. So the slider is dependent on two main gestures, the horizontal drag gesture and the tap gesture. And then both of those are going to be part of the gesture arena team. And the gesture arena team is like, so basically when you tap, there's multiple actions you can do with the slider. If you just tap it, the value indicator is going to pop up and then close if you just tap it eventually. If you hold it, drag it, and then let go, that activates the tap gesture first, and then it's going to drag, and then it's going to let go. The drag gesture is going to take precedence over the tap gesture. So the moment like the value indicator detects that drag is being done on the slider, the tap gesture is no longer going to activate. This is done through the gesture arena team. It just, I make sure it chooses which gesture is more important. So this is done here. I add the drag gesture first because it takes priority over the tap gesture. And then these gesture detectors have three main interactions. There's handle drag start, which is going to pop the value indicator using an animation controller, give you that nice animation. There's handle drag end. So handle drag start and handle tap down are going to do the exact same animation. They call it the exact same method. Handle drag end, handle tap up, and interaction are going to call the exact same method. And this method is actually an interaction, and which is basically going to like create that animation where the value indicator animates back to like not being there. And then the third gesture you're going to see is the drag gesture, which basically allows you to drag the value indicator and you'll see it move. And this is going to be using, and this is just going to be moving it for you. So yeah, like I mentioned, internationalization is something you have to worry about. So if your text direction is RTL versus LTR, there's going to be different outcomes. So yeah, here's an example of how it's being done. In this case, I tapped on it first, but then I dragged it. So then the gesture, we need to recognize that the drag gesture is being activated. That means the tap gesture no longer exists pretty much. Like it's still there, but it's not like, you're not going to see it anymore until you let go of it. And then it drags. And then the moment you let go, like if the slider indicator can be shown, then the slider indicator falls down, or the overlay will disappear. So that's how the slider uses the gesture package. And then there's two more, scheduler and semantics. The schedulers, I just threw this in because it's used only once in the slider, but it's still being used. It's basically when you're starting your interaction and ending the interaction, you can actually deal with time dilation. So if you want the animation controller to like appear slower, so like the animation goes slower, then you can actually do that. And then, so if your time dilation is like small, like if it's a negative number, then it's gonna go slower. If it's over 1, it's gonna go faster. So that's just how we use the scheduler. I can show you actually in how right here. So if I activate slow motion, oops. So this is the Flutter Gallery. Here's the settings. If I activate slow motion, the time dilation is going to go much slower. And now if I go to the slider example, you'll see the interaction is much slower now. And then like when I hovered it, you saw that the hover went slower. You see that the value indicator is much slower now. It takes a while and then it goes down. So that's done using the time dilation. And then the last thing I want to talk about is semantics. Like semantics, basically, if you can't see that well, you want to have higher, like you want your app to look good with like bigger text scaling. Also, if you can't see or can't see like very well, then we want the phone to tell you what's happening. So like you can turn on the voice over for your phone, and semantics is gonna work properly when you use the slider. So for the range slider, we had to create some custom semantics because there's gonna be 2 value indicators, and we want to make sure that people who are blind or have it like visual disability or something can use the slider properly without a problem. And this is done talking with our accessibility lead, and we work pretty hard towards it. So that's all the packages used. That's the Flutter framework like in itself. Now like the rendering pipeline, like in the slider, like you can repaint. Like the Flutter architecture is actually reactive. It doesn't just always update. Like we only update it when you need to update it. So like the slider is only going to activate when you click the slider indicator or any part of the slider. Then it's going to like rebuild itself or like give its like re-layout itself or repaint itself. And you'll see this throughout the slider. Let me see if I have an example. So paint update label painter is gonna update like mark needs layout is gonna lay out the entire slider, and just the slider. There's also gonna be mark needs paint, which will like update the paint. There's also mark needs semantics update, and that's gonna do the reactive architecture. So now like in the slider class, in the render box class, there's a paint method, and the paint method is gonna allow you to paint into the canvas. So it's right here, the paint. And basically what's happening is, like Flutter, the way it does it, it doesn't actually have like native OEM widgets where, like, for example, like when you code in Xcode, when you're using Xcode, you're gonna have like those native widgets. So if the operating system updates, those widgets are gonna update once you like recompile it. What Flutter pretty much does, it uses Skia, which is a 2D rendering engine, and it lets you like paint directly to the canvas using like 114 small calls. Like there's also like Harfuzz, which like handles like labels and whatnot. But basically, and this is being done through the Dart UI. This is actually not in the Flutter package. This is done in the Dart UI. And basically, the reason in Dart UI is because we want it to be unopinionated. And there are only 114 building blocks to use in the underlying API. The goal is not to make calls directly to Skia or Harfuzz from Dart, but instead give you the best of the best. We want to expose the fast APIs and give you enough low-level calls like you can do this pretty easily. So we don't want to throw you off like an API cliff, but we also don't want to throw you into the ocean with too many calls. So we don't throw you overboard by not giving you enough tools. By the ocean, I mean like you're not gonna have too many tools. Like let's say 8 of these 10 like Dart UI calls are gonna be slow, and 2 of the 10 are gonna be fast. Like, and it's your job to figure that out. No, like that's basically the 114 calls are gonna be efficient calls. They're gonna let you do pretty much anything to canvas. And here's how it's split up. There's like Ali, which is like semantics, geometry, other, painting, so like squares, rectangles, whatnot, compositing, moving it like to the left or like whatnot. Text is gonna be updating text, like text font, text spacing, and like the window itself. So basically Dart UI are gonna make calls directly to the canvas, and with those 114 calls, you pretty much make the entire Flutter framework. Like I mentioned before, Flutter does not use system like OEM widgets given by the OS. Flutter essentially is a blank canvas, and you make low-level calls. And basically, Skia, a special revision of Skia, will paint this into the canvas. Yeah, and the slider library is not going to be painting it directly. It's like the slider theme has the actual implementation. All the slider.dart class does is just paint it, just tells it when to paint this, but this is actually being done in slider theme. So I thought it'd be I thought it'd be a pretty interesting topic and to talk about how each one was implemented using these 114 calls. So if you don't remember, the slider is split into 5 different components. There's the value indicator, there's the track, there's the thumb, overlay, and tick. And I want you guys to guess the shape. So if anybody wants to mention it, what do you think? Like, this is like the Dart UI calls you're making. What does this code, like this actually comes from the slider theme. What do you think this code does? Like what component does this code belong to? I'll give you 10 seconds. If no one responds, I'll just mention it in the next slide.
I think we're stumped.
This is like this like it's a bit hard to understand, but this one is actually it's gonna be drawing the track. This pretty much stands for a rounded rectangular track, and then depending if it's LTR or TL, it's gonna paint differently because remember the track for the inactive part of the track should be 1px, well, 2px smaller than the active part of the track. So that's that, like, so that code generates, like, so this part's gonna be 2px bigger than this part, like 1px bigger here and 1px bigger here. I mean 1px bigger here and 1px bigger here. This is an active part of the track. So here's, like, I want to go through the 5 component shapes, and this is another one of the components. This is just the tick shape. So just the specific tick shape right here, just the small circle for the discrete sliders. This one. This is the overlay, this circle outside. And then this one is the, I'll give it 5 seconds. This is the value indicator. The reason you can tell it's the value indicator is because the label is being like painted into the canvas at the very bottom, and the only component that has a label, like any text, is the value indicator. So the value indicator. And then this last one is going to be the thumb. So like that's pretty much the Flutter framework in 30 minutes. Now I'm going to be talking about like the complications that get into like the slider. So some of the problems that went into making the slider. And this is always like growing. The slider is never done. It keeps, like, if you knew any of my friends, they'll tell you how much I talk about the slider, because I always work on the slider. I always talk about the slider. Like Flutter is pretty big. Has millions of developers, fastest growing skill on LinkedIn, billion of apps are using it. Like Stadia uses Flutter. Like my Google Home uses Flutter. So like there's different, like, the idea is Flutter is ambient and you can go on any single device. And so if I'm making a slider, which has to be adaptable and responsive. So I guess it's just like showing it like Flutter even more. Yeah, so like this, the Google Home devices are running using Flutter. So like there's actually a case where the Google Home device is using slider, and if I make a change into the GitHub, like into Flutter GitHub, then all the sliders worldwide will eventually update, like in the Google Home and whatnot. So we gotta make sure that the slider works on pretty much any display and whatnot. And this leads to a lot of like unexpected issues. Like I'm not sure. I'm pretty confident this is actually using the material slider, but I'm not 100% sure. But like there was an issue where the overlay, like where the thumb was hard to get when the user put the slider in a vertical stance. There was another issue where, like, if the user activated the value indicator, but then you got out of like that route, that page, then the value indicator will still stick to the page. So no matter how many times you called it, a new value indicator would be called, and we don't want the shape to get stuck there. So like that was an issue we had to fix, and something you don't normally think of. Slider is on like TV. There was a case where like someone was trying to implement like a slider, like a Flutter slider on your TV, and again, like these are the cases that we need to worry about, because that is Flutter's goal, like to be ambient. But like for example, if you're using the YouTube slider on your TV, then like there are some things that you expect to have, and these are things we still need to work on. So yeah, and you can see all these issues if you go to like Flutter, GitHub issues, and search up slider. There's a bunch of them. But like let's say you have a issue like let's say you want something and you might see like maybe you see a problem with the slider or any widget, then create a GitHub issue. That's what we base our work off. Like we want, like it's open source, so if you want to do it yourself, go for it. But let's say if you want us to take care of it, then create a GitHub issue. Maybe you're not the only one that wants this to be created. So if you create the GitHub issue and it receives a lot of thumbs up, then it prioritizes things for us to make sure that we create that that possibility. So like make sure you thumbs up issues. And that's pretty much the presentation. I know it's quite a lot to take in. If you want to play around with any of the widgets, I recommend you go to this website. It's something my team and I worked on. It just shows all the components and how they're used. If you want to like keep up to date with any new topics, we have like a medium team pretty much, and we just post there consistently. So if you follow medium.com/flutter, you might see my name somewhere, and because I like to post there. And then the last one is like the actual Flutter repository on GitHub. Flutter is open source, so if there's an issue, make sure you go to github.com/flutterflutter, or just try it out yourself. And if you don't want to go through the trouble of trying it out yourself, like Bert mentioned, there's also Dartpad and CodePen now, which is basically an online IDE that lets you run Flutter without having to like downloading and whatnot. There's still limitations, but it's a cool idea of having an online IDE and just being able to run your work from anywhere. So yeah, if you have any questions, I'll try my best to answer them. If not, then I'll just put them as my notes, and then I'll get them answered.
Okay, thanks, Jose. Are there any questions out there?
Yeah, I have a question, if you don't mind.
Of course.
Okay. Hey, Jose. First of all, great presentation. It was really nice. Yeah, that's a deep dive into widgets, but it's kind of neat seeing how a more complex, UI control goes all the way down to the canvas and stuff. Because I've kind of touched on some of that a little bit, and it's really interesting. It really shows the flexibility and power of Flutter and its widget design. One trivial thing, about a third of the way through your slides, you were talking about the slider theme and a Dart theme. I think you have a typo because it said Dart, D-A-R-T theme instead of Dart theme.
It should definitely be Dart theme.
Yeah. So like I said, you can find it later. I think it was about a third of the way in when you were talking about themes. But that leads me to my question. That's one of the bigger challenges I found. I've seen a number of presentations that Will's done and found them really interesting. And there was one with Will and Philippe, and they were actually trying to set the color of a widget at one time, and they actually had to pause the video and go dig through code. And that's sort of my comment / question is there any good references for really getting your head wrapped around the themes and their precedents? Because my first few Flutter projects, I just sat there and applied different styles and colors and what pretty much locally. And then what I've been trying to do is get better about it and moving my theming higher up in the chain to almost the root where I define the material app, because I'd like to take the theme that I design in like Adobe XD and map that over as the core theme. So I've got my colors, my fonts, my size, everything defined at the top, and I should only have just local overrides. But what I find is I get down to a widget and it's like, okay, where is it grabbing its color from? Is it getting it from the button, the canvas, the button theme? And the theme hierarchy and structure is quite complex. I just was wondering, is there any good reference material for helping sort of set that all in your mind, what the precedences are?
So I'm glad you mentioned that, actually. I don't know if you can see this. This is an idea I've actually had for myself too, because I thought theme generated should be easier at Google. So I kind of want to create this like website where basically you have like a material palette where you can choose whatever font you want, and it themes your application for you. So you see, in this case, I chose that color. If you want the secondary color, you just click secondary. Well, it's not. This is just a proof of concept, I guess.
Right. But you're on the track with what I'm thinking is, being able to define it. Because I know if you just pull up a package, just start a Flutter app and you don't define a theme, you inherit a theme. And then there's sort of the global light and dark that you get. But like I said, I'm trying to get a workflow where, okay, I'm in Adobe XD. I set up 2-3 colors to define my Flutter app or my Flutter website. I select 1 or 2 fonts. I set their font styles and stuff. Now I want to take that and put that as my top root theme that my apps, but I'm still having a hard time finding out which theme information for, whether it's color or style, whatever, is getting grabbed and has precedence for that widget.
Yeah, that I agree with you. So I totally agree with you. With the way I do it, like right now, is I just I will either go to like the theme data, and then I'm able to like find information. You'll see like a lot of it's being accessed right here. And
Yeah,
it's pretty
quite a bit, just like you're suggesting.
Yeah. Ideally, I think it'd be awesome if we can somehow incorporate like into the IDE, like similar to how you can like center stuff and whatnot. When you do control space, it gives you the options to, like all these things and whatnot. I think it'd be cool if there was something in the IDE that lets you deal with theming, or even better, if there's a tool that lets you do that.
I agree. If there was something in the dev tools where when you click on a widget, it shows you its size and stuff, and it could at least show you or let you walk through the hierarchy that would show you, oh yeah, it's using this theme, but it's been overrun. 2 widgets up, it got overridden by this. So you could at least see the precedence or hierarchy for the overloading or overriding of different properties in the theming data. That would be outstanding.
Yeah,
Michael, if you don't mind, I'd love to comment also.
Yeah,
Michael, that I know exactly what you're talking about. Was the boring show where we wanted to change the color of something in the bottom navigation, and we couldn't figure it out for a real long time because there was so much advanced theming going on that wasn't quite obvious.
Exactly.
And so clearly this is something, a developer experience problem that we're well aware of over in Flutter. One of the things that we've spoken to the IDE tools team about is being able to inspect widgets and actually say where the value they're getting for a particular piece of UI like color or something like that comes from.
Yeah.
There is a lot of complexity in build context and how themes are passed down and stuff like that. So it's not so obvious for the tools, even though it ends up being kind of straightforward for the code. I believe that there is a bug somewhere. Maybe I'll look for it because you can +1 it and then that can help it get some priority. And every time we have a conversation with someone like you, we take that back to them also and say like, hey, people brought this up again. So like, we really need to make sure that we don't forget about this idea. And about workflow stuff right now, what Jose's working on with the theme generator is a really good stopgap measure right now for at least being able to say, when I make these choices for colors and stuff like that, it has these consequences basically in a theme. Obviously, you're talking about when you go and override and have nested themes and stuff like that, it gets more complicated. But people have trouble even just with the basics of getting color to behave the way they want them to, or saying like, I don't know why this is blue, but I thought blue is my secondary color. Is this thing secondary? That sort of question.
Right.
But even beyond that, Hans, who is the main TL on the material project, he knows that material theming needs a developer experience kind of overhaul, because theming grew organically from just kind of this idea to now this thing that's really powerful because it's in every single widget pretty much all over the place. And it's time to kind of like take a step back and say like, okay, how do we refactor this into something more manageable? He has a document, a design doc on flutter.dev that I don't, I forget the title of it, but I think it's called like how we will do theming, where he talks about this problem and how it's something that he wants to tackle really at a more fundamental level. So rather, we're talking about some of these things we can do to make it more bearable now, but we also know that just as a concept, as a piece of technology, we can do better in making it a clear developer experience.
That's outstanding. That's exactly what I'm looking for. You're totally in sync with what my experience is, and it sounds like I'm not unique. But yeah, I absolutely think the power of it is amazing. It's just I hate seeing my code with all these local overrides when it's like, no, I should be doing this more intelligently. That the root of my app should have all my theme defined, and it should only be overriding for special cases.
Yeah, we're also in material design taking another look at how color schemes work. It was a simple solution for us getting all the things to behave, but we're also taking a look at whether or not people are using them the way we intended for them to out in the real world, where things are more complicated than just with our designs inside. So there might even be some change in what the specification is on this to make that even easier to understand too. So long-term problem that we're working on because we hear you.
By the way, since you're here, Will, if I can, I'll blow a little sunshine up your skirt or whatever. But big kudos, thumbs up on the whole material design website and information there. I reference it quite frequently to make sure that I've got good, but it's outstanding to see all the valuable information that's there, and appreciate all the hard work you and everybody on the material design team do to make it so outstanding.
Oh, thank you. It's for you, so to hear that it is valuable means a lot. In fact, if I can ask, do you work with a designer or do you do your own designs?
Yes.
Yeah.
And the reason I say that, I've worked with designers in the past, and I have found designers to be immensely valuable. I used to work at Adobe years ago, and
oh, cool.
Well, I originally worked at Quark, and we basically, as engineers, had to do our own design. They didn't have designers, but that was long ago and far away in the early days. I went to Adobe, and I learned how valuable a good designer. Andrei Hirosumchuk was one of my first idols there. And working with a great designer just makes a huge difference. But now I'm just a small independent developer, so I try to bring the tools that I was taught and learned, but I still realize my limitations, and I've been trying to go back and learn Adobe XD, but I do not think there's anything that can replace a good designer working with a programmer.
Well, that sentiment is very common in the Flutter and Android development communities, where people wish they had more access to designers, but we have to understand that people don't always, and they have to be able to come up with good solutions on their own. So one of the things that in Material we're also going to try to work on is to see what we can do to help people with the use case of working without a designer or without a designer enough. So I bet there's some stuff. I'm glad the website as it is valuable to you, but I would keep an eye out over the next coming years to see what else we're able to do to make things work out of the box beautiful for you.
Great. Well, thank you. I look forward to it.
Okay. Sorry, Jose. Didn't mean to.
No worries. I added the document that you were talking about from Hans, like talking about like theming and stuff.
Thank you, Jose. I'll take a look at that.
Yeah.
So is the material team thinking about creating some kind of a visual design tool? So that a non-programmer or even a programmer could just easily visually lay out something?
That's not what I meant when I was talking about that. I was thinking more like how with Material 1, Android developers just kind of knew what to do to make their app look a certain way. And then with
Yeah.
Material 2, we exploded the number of features so far that now people just aren't sure how to wrangle it all back into an experience that looks great all the time. And it can be overwhelming to have to make choices with theming and stuff like that, especially if they're not coming with a brand or a style guide from a company that makes those choices for you. So we're more just kind of thinking about theming and the website and stuff like that. Just think, how can we, and also Jose is working on a project with one of our other engineers, Anthony, that will work on making some adaptive things like between desktop and mobile free, because a lot of people have come to us and said, like, yes, I know that I could do so many things on my own, but really it would be help if you could just help me get from A to B as fast as possible. So really thinking about shortcuts that we can do to help you do things, or either before you really dive into making them super custom, or instead of having to make them super custom.
Gotcha. Okay. Jose, just a little feedback from my perspective. Wow. It's a little bit more complicated than I thought to create a robust widget. My hat is off to you. What resources did you use to really understand what you had to do?
Oh, trust me, I was struggling with the slider widget. It's quite a lot to take in, and my resource was pretty much the Flutter API docs. Like one of the really cool things we care about is the Flutter API docs. So if you look at the slider widget, like if you go to the top, you'll see like this dart right here, and basically the way this is seen in Flutter is that it's slider Flutter. You'll see like in the API doc, if this is still like right now, that doc was just recently added, so it might not be here yet. But like you might, a lot of the time when you like this information you see right here comes directly from here. So the API docs are really useful. And I might not be. I'm honestly not the best programmer, but I talk quite a bit, and like I'm pretty resourceful in terms of like talking to the people that I need to talk to. So like Hans, I got a lot of opinions from him, and same with Anthony.
Gotcha. Okay, so I mean, it sounds like there's no sort of reference. There's no real reference material to help you. It sounds like you had to read the API, you had to read the code, and you had to talk to other widget developers to kind of figure out the complex parts. I gotcha.
Like the slider, to be honest, is a more like it is a complex widget compared to a lot of the other widgets, and I think if you really want to go into it, I recommend doing it. Just playing around with it will help a lot, and it's a lot about playing around with it. For example, something I didn't talk about that I think might be useful for you to know is when you're painting it into the canvas. So here's the canvas, and right down here you'll see that there's like the low-level calls. These are hierarchical. So pretty much the ones at the very top are going to be painted, like imagine it's a stack, are going to be painted at the bottom of the stack, and then the next ones are going to be painted on top. So if you go to like the label painter right here, the text has to be painted at the very top. So that's something that's pretty useful to know. But yeah, if you go to any of the like scale right here, and then if I go to like open it in terminal, here's my other local, and print my working directory, you're gonna see that this is gonna be painted in the .ui library. Just it's pretty interesting knowing that like all of the work is being done with 114 calls. So I'll say it's about playing around with it too.
Yeah. Actually, is there a very, very simple widget that would be a good one to take a look at to just get started?
Well, do you recommend any? Maybe like the center widget? I don't.
Oh, that's a good idea. The layout widgets are probably a good one. But they won't have much for rendering anything you really see. Ironically, the thing we usually go to when something simple needs to be explained is button, but buttons under the hood are actually pretty complicated in Flutter. Maybe switch or checkbox. Some of those simple controls that are kind of small would be good.
Gotcha. Okay.
I also posted a link to a new video that I haven't checked out yet, but is by two people that I really love, Hans Muller and Dan Field, who are longtime engineers on the Flutter project, that they gave at Carnegie Mellon, kind of like on Flutter, how Flutter is under the hood, how it's built and stuff like that. And so it's another perspective on some of that stuff. Probably really good.
I highly recommend watching that video. It's a bit lengthy, like an hour 20. But I honestly, like, while I was preparing for this talk, I looked at that talk because a lot of those concepts, like that video, it's pretty new and it's really useful in my opinion. That video, like you'll hear me, like a lot of the words I said were coming from that video actually, like a lot of the low level stuff. Could
you post a link to that video?
I did in the chat for this meetup, for this meeting.
Perfect. Okay, anyone else out there have any questions? Sounds like no. Jose, really appreciate this. This was great, and it's great really to talk to an insider. And Will, thank you also for being here, because it's just nice to feel like we're connected a little bit, and that absolutely helps.
Yeah, thank you.
It's our pleasure. Thank you so much for continuing to do these and everything it takes to run these organizations for us. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, we really do.
Yeah, I tell you, I believe Flutter is partially going to take over the world. It's the best. It's the most excitement and the most energy I've seen in quite a while in the software area, and it's really nice to see that. Michael and I have been in this business for a pretty long time, and it's been a while since there's been really something to truly get excited about. And Flutter is it. And Dart, snuck up on us. Dart is I saw it in the very beginning, 2011, whatever it was, 2012, trying to replace JavaScript, blah, blah, blah. And, just had no interest in it and was sort of waiting for something to happen there. Nothing ever seemed to happen. And then, Flutter drew me back to look closely at Dart. And I love Dart, to tell you the truth. I'm using Dart on the back end. I've been really happy that you guys have slimmed down the server version of Dart, and I've been trying to pitch that truly somebody should create a little internal team of gung-ho CS students that want to create a really lean and mean Dart compiler and runtime, for embedded. And I'm sure you could just use it as is embedded. But, it's just, it's very, very comfortable, and it's great to be able to use it on the back end and the front end. So,
well, I'll pass that along to the Dart team.
Once they get Firebase to support Dart in the back end, I'll be very happy instead of having to switch over to TypeScript or JavaScript.
Yeah. And it's really, it truly to me feels.
No.
Oh, bye.
Bye, Bert.
This is the new world we're in now. People can leave meetings faster than ever.
Yeah, Dart is really useful. It lets us paint into the canvas. It the just-in-time compiler lets us do hot reload, and ahead of time is good for for your actual application that you will deliver on the App Store.
And I'm telling you, it's really convenient to be friends with the team that runs the language when you need something too.
Oh, bet. Well, they seem like a lot of bright guys. I watched the null safe type meeting this morning, and bright guys, because the one guy, I can't remember his name. He was talking
Is it
about.
Bob?
See the guy that's his static picture usually has him and his cat or in his blog. Yeah,
Yeah.
he seems like a very bright individual.
Oh, he is. Yeah.
Bob is like anytime I have like a art question.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, that's right. Jose's getting really into the language itself.
Yeah, I'm gonna add this article I wrote that I think is actually pretty useful. It's like 3 cool Dart patterns that are. Let me just add it to the. Like it's 3 cool Dart patterns that will like be useful for like Flutter development. Like the conditional statement, a lot of people know that. It's basically a Boolean. Then like you choose which one you want to bring.
Right.
This statement, like the dot dot dart, lets you, and it, like let's say you have a list, and then you want to, and then you have another list, because like you're always working with a lot of lists. Like let's say you have a list, and then a for loop within that like list. This dot 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 lets you like merge into the list, and then the last one is the immediately invoked anonymous function. This is the one a lot of people don't know, which is useful when you want to immediately like call like a color, but instead of like modularizing your code, which might be complicated, you can just use the immediately invoking anonymous function expression.
Those were amazing additions to Dart 2.3 because boy, it sure cleaned up a lot of my code.
Yeah.
Cool. Welcome back, Bert.
Yeah. My computer, unbeknownst to me, disconnected from the power supply, so I had to switch over to my phone. Anyways, this has really been great. Do we have more things to talk about, or should we wrap it up?
I think we're good.
Yeah, I think we're good. Once again, Jose, thank you for an amazing presentation. Well done, and thank you for joining us this evening.
Thank you so much.
Yep. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Come again.
Yeah, thanks for doing this.
Yeah.